morning. Thank you for joining us this morning, especially so early, but it's a beautiful day, and we've got a really important topic that we want to discuss. But I wanted to just mention for those who are new, Inside Business Live was created a couple of years ago in partnership with our newsroom. We wanted to tackle topics that are important to our businesses and create conversations with our esteemed panelists to help solve problems. You know, we have to do that together. Over the last couple of years, we've tackled topics such as the future of energy, workforce development and talent acquisition, how we can overcome the gaps in our education system, tourism, the future of tourism, affordable living and how that impacts our local businesses. And then today we're talking about the state of our economy and what our future holds. So we do this on a quarterly basis, and we invite you to come to these events, and please share it with other colleagues who are interested in taking part of helping solve these problems in their business community. And you can do that. Sign up for our business newsletter at the back of your sheet of your program. It shows you how to do that, and we publish that twice a week. But right now we're going to go right into our program. I'm going to introduce you to Emily Williams and John McDermott from the Post and Courier team, who will introduce our panelists, and we'll go straight into the questions, and then towards the end we will have audience questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. First, I'd like to thank our panelists, but I'd also like them to do a quick introduction of themselves, maybe from Jerry down there.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Gordon. I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Public Administration at College of Charleston and a fellow at the Joseph P. Riley Center for Livable Communities. I came to Charleston in December from Northern Virginia, where I was the president and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority for 35 years in one day.
Hello, can you hear me? I am Jamie Haley. I am the co-founder and executive director of an organization called Lowcountry Local First. We are advocates for local independent businesses, and we do several different things. One, we make sure that our elected officials understand the importance of supporting those businesses, that the community understands the importance of supporting those businesses, both as a way to preserve our culture and grow our economy. And then we provide technical services and training for those businesses as well.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Brent Jonas. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Relations for the Charleston Regional Development Alliance. We are the region's economic development organization. It's our mission to support economic development by attracting the world's best companies, talent, and entrepreneurs. We're a public-private partnership. We're supported by the 3 counties, the 5 largest municipalities, and over 130 private companies. I've been in Charleston for 22 years, and happy to be on the panel with another blue host, John McDermott.
Good morning. I'm Perrin Lawson. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Explore Charleston. Until recently, we were known as the Charleston Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. We are the region's destination marketing organization, so we handle tourism marketing. We are a 501c6 not-for-profit. We are funded through a variety of different means, both publicly and privately. We have about 800 member businesses and 9 funding governments.
Thank you. Kind of the subtext of this event is, we've been in a 10-year economic expansion, and sort of the question that everyone is, how long can it go on? So I looked back, I went back into our archives and looked 10 years ago, the newspaper from November 21st, so that would have been the events from November 20th, 2009. And believe it or not, this is to the day, the 10th anniversary where Boeing broke ground on the Dreamliner plane. And also the unemployment rate came out that day. And it's for South Carolina, it was 12%. Wow. 10% for Charleston County. So that's sort of the framework, that's kind of where we started. They called them green shoots back then. So let's wade in just like kind of maybe look back a little and see how we got here. I was wondering if each of us could tell you about your perspective about the evolution of this expansion, sort of where we started, how we got here, from your individual purchases, if you will.
I guess I'll go first. unemployment rates are a function of two things, not just the number of jobs, but also the workforce availability, and particularly the workforce availability in the area of need for the companies that are hiring. So when Boeing first got here, they either were able to find or attract or grow, excuse me, a workforce that had the skill sets that they need. As you look forward to start to answer the question about whether or not the growth of the economy can continue in the same trend lines as they were in the last 10 years, one has to consider the workforce requirements of the future, which are all around technology. So the community either has to have or be able to attract or be able to grow people who have the technology skills that will be attractive to companies. If you can do that, any community that can do that is going to be a winner, because there is such extraordinary demand right now nationwide. Even in the Silicon Valley, there are not enough tech workers. So if the community can provide tech workers, the trends will continue.
And John, you referenced 10 years ago with Boeing. I'll take it back even 15 years prior, both at the state level and the regional level. At the state level, you had BMW, which came online in the upstate, and that was really the first signal shot across the bow, whatever you want to call it, to the world that South Carolina was going to be a major player in manufacturing. And it gave companies around the world the confidence that they could come to South Carolina and our workforce could produce world-class products. You also parallel at that time the Charleston County regional situation as the Navy base closed, and our organization spun out of that as the 3 county leaders really understood at that time. You had tourism and the military were really the 2 economic drivers in the market, and one of those economic drivers was almost mortally wounded, and we needed to diversify our economy. So over the next 25 years, you had a diversification that has happened, and the great cherry on top of that story is now we're back from a military employment standpoint at the same level we were at when the Navy base closed. So it's really a sea change in that you had the state becoming a world player on the manufacturing front. You had BMW coming in. You had the changes in our market due to the diversification of the economy after the Navy base closure, and then obviously 10 years out we had Boeing and the real success that they brought to town.
So when we started our organization 13 years ago, it was pretty much when the recession was beginning. And because people were getting laid off, we saw a lot of entrepreneurs who were starting their own business and needing a lot of support. And when we talk about diversifying our economy, I think that we've got to make sure that we're not so focused on 1 or 2 industries, that the businesses that are really the ones that are creating the majority of the jobs are not forgotten. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to make sure that we are focused on as we move into an economy that right now seems very strong. So while we might have had 12% unemployment, now we're at about 2.9% unemployment. But if you look at the African American community, they're at 7% unemployment. So we still have a lot of work to do. All that glitters is not gold. And so I would just say that, just like you are going to diversify your stock portfolio, we need to be diversifying the way that we look at economic development.
Well, if you want to look at 2009 from a tourism perspective, I guess the good news is we didn't fall off a cliff. We were so dependent on our drive market, and that really is what kept us alive. But it really did dovetail also with Boeing. When we looked back and did some real digging, we found out how much travel was being generated by Boeing, even in advance of their starting to build the plant. And we knew what that was going to generate, that the amounts of business travel, meetings, conventions, meals consumed, shopping, and everything like that. So that was a huge shot in the arm for us then. Of course, the thing I think has had more to do with our ongoing success in tourism and visitation in general has been the expansion of air service since the launch of Southwest in March of 2011. And that was a 6-year process to get them to fly here. But that has been the absolute game changer for us, and that has been why we've been able to grow a lot of different markets that previously found us either too difficult or too expensive to reach. as long as this continues, I see for our industry, a lot of good days ahead.
And John, if I could,
Yeah.
Jamie brings up an interesting point with talking about diversification and sectors. So if you look back, I mentioned the 25-year sort of arc of our company. We started out in a crisis mode, go get jobs, any jobs, and we've been strategically driven in really 5-year increments, as we've gone from go get jobs, any jobs, to, okay, let's target specific industries, to let's target specific industries in specific clusters, to where we are now, where we really specifically target 4 clusters: aerospace, automotive, for obvious reasons. You have OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, and Boeing, Mercedes-Benz, and Volvo. IT, how many of you in this room would be surprised if I told you that there are over 600 information technology companies in our 3-county region? Most people are. And what's very interesting about that is about half of those are at least 5 employees. So it's not all 1 and 2 person operations in the garage. So we have a burgeoning IT sector, so that helps. And probably our fastest growing segment of our economy is the life science industry. We're playing off the strengths that we have with the Medical University of South Carolina, Roper, and Trident. And a lot of intellectual property is coming out of those organizations. So we, in the past, have not done a very good job of capturing that intellectual property here locally, and it's left. There's been a brain drain of that type of worker and that type of product. So we're really focusing now, and you can point to different examples. A big win a couple of years ago for our region was a company called Thorn Research. Any of you that watch any U.S. soccer games and the ribbon boards that are around the side of the field, you'll see Thorn. Thorn makes nutraceutical products, B vitamin supplements, things like that. And they are the official provider for the U.S. Olympic team, the U.S. soccer team, the MMA, and also many medical clinics around the world. So I think, to Jamie's point, it's easy to focus on the big elephants of Boeing, Mercedes, and Volvo. We have a very diverse and changing economy, and what we're trying to do is develop the ecosystems around those manufacturers and fill in. You can think of it as the big rocks in the jar, and we're trying to fill in the sand around them.
Let me beat this horse to death a little bit. Diversification is absolutely critical. If you consider, the audience looks like none of you will remember the early 70s, but in the early 70s, Seattle had Boeing, and that was what they had. They considered at the time diversification to mean that we had Boeing, and we also had all their subcontractors, so we were diversified. Never occurred to them that Boeing would almost go out of business, and therefore the subcontractors would have no business to do. But in the early 70s, when people started coming back from Southeast Asia and the military stopped buying aircraft, and the unemployment rate and the inflation rate were both in double digits, the civilian aircraft, civilian aviation companies were buying, and airlines weren't buying aircraft. So Boeing almost went out of business. A very famous sign on the side of the road as you left Seattle on the primary highway going eastward that said, will the last person leaving Seattle please turn out all the lights, because they were about to. And so prior to that, they had all said the same thing. This couldn't possibly happen here. Same thing happened in Detroit. Couldn't possibly happen here. In Pittsburgh with steel, Charlotte with banking. It'll never happen to us. And I heard it before I left in D.C. We have federal contracting, and it will never happen to us. Don't close your eyes and blink, because it will happen. And diversifying the economy is the only way to avoid absolute decay when you lose a primary employer or a primary industry. So it's vitally important.
So John had mentioned what the unemployment rate looked like here 10 years ago, but another jobs report came out yesterday. Unemployment actually went down again to another historic low, so it was at 2.9%, and now we're looking at 2.6% statewide. And then when we look at the Charleston region specifically, we're looking at 1.5%. So the Charleston metro area is tied with only one other metro area in the country, that's in Iowa, for the lowest unemployment rate in the country right now. So I wanted to ask you, do you have any specific examples of how you've seen the tightening of the labor market here impact businesses? And then on top of that, any strategies that you see for kind of lessening the impact that that may have on businesses here?
I'm happy to take that one because it has certainly impacted the hospitality industry tremendously. It's no secret there are a lot of hotels and restaurants and other businesses that cater to visitors are opening. They're having a very difficult time finding employees because these people just, for the most part, don't exist. What it has done, though, is create the opportunity to really address a number of problems up to and including traffic congestion, where we're encouraging people to work more closely to where they live, because we do have assets spread out throughout the entire region. And that has been a plus. Also, it's been an opportunity to get people involved in the industry working who might not have considered it before, once they realize that there is the opportunity to work where it's relatively close to home. But we've got a couple of initiatives we're involved in that are doing a lot of outreach to people who maybe were marginalized in the past as far as employment opportunities. Certainly, reaching out to people with perhaps intellectual challenges to not necessarily put them into a job, but find their abilities and create a job around that. But as far as the impact this has had, you've got hotels that are operating short-staffed. You've had restaurants that have reduced hours or decided perhaps not to offer lunch one day of the week. So it's a critical issue, and we understand also that it's not just affecting our industry; it's essentially affecting every industry in the region.
Yeah. Let me say a couple things. I'll start with the bad news, quote unquote bad news. The bad news of this is that we are in a global war for talent. It is a problem around the world. The demographics are shifting, and workforces are short around the world. So that's the bad news. The great news is 1.5% unemployment. That's great, but it's historically low. I think your reporting yesterday, we were number one in the country in terms of the lowest rate. We host companies from all over the world who are interested in locating in Charleston. And people always ask, what do they ask you about when they come here? The number one thing they ask us about is talent. Do you have the workforce to do what we need to do? Our answer to that question is always yes, we do. And whether we do or not, we're saying yes. We have a wonderful system here and a couple of things that are working in our advantage. The first of which is our pool of available labor is growing 3 times the rate of the rest of the United States. So that puts us at an advantage from the start. The second part of that is not really talked about that much is you hear the number thrown around all the time. I'll use the 5-year rolling average, 31 people a day moving into this market. Of those 31 people a day, 2/3 are between 18 and 44, and 2/3 have at least an associate degree. So you have young, smart people who are moving to our marketplace. Again, advantage South Carolina, advantage Charleston. Third thing I'll add that helps us with the talent gap and the talent pool is the phenomenal higher education system we have here. We have the jewel of the crown with Trident Technical College in terms of workforce training. They're a national model, and they continue to lead the way. And then our higher ed institutions, starting statewide with University of South Carolina and Clemson, and then moving locally to Charleston Southern, the Citadel, College of Charleston, all great, and can't forget the Medical University as well, the training they do. So we have inherent advantages over many, many markets in the fact that our labor pool is growing, and the fact that we have targeted training. And then we can move to K through 12. I'm sure there's a question in John's sheet probably somewhere about K through 12, but there are a lot of things that we are doing well and trying to move the needle to start with earlier workforce training in the K through 12 rank. So I'll be quiet now, but the news is not all bad. There's help on the way in terms of our talent pool.
So we are definitely seeing this. We're seeing businesses that are not growing because they can't find the labor that they need to grow. But I would say what tends to be pretty unpopular is that we need to raise our minimum wage. Like, we don't have a affordable housing issue, we have a living wage issue. So our minimum wage has not increased since 2008. The number out there that says a living wage for a single individual is almost $13 an hour, which would afford that individual to pay about $740 a month in rent for a one-bedroom place. But the median rent here is about $950 a month. So I think if we're talking about trying to be able to have reduced congestion, have people be able to work closer to, or live closer to where they work, then we've got to make sure that we have housing that they can actually afford. And we all know, if anybody is familiar at all with the building sector and construction, like, it is just not possible to build anything inexpensively right now. So I would say we have a wage issue. I talk to people all of the time who are pre-networking, who want to move to Charleston, who are highly qualified individuals to do multiple things, but they come here and they do everything they can to keep their job back in Washington, D.C., or back in New York, because we cannot compete with the salaries, even though the cost of living here is high. So I would say that that's something that we need to address, and in order to be able to really attract the talent that we want, and to be able to make sure that the businesses that we depend upon, the businesses that we want to take our clients to when they're coming from out of town and looking at moving here, are actually able to grow and thrive along with the rest of the economy. So.
Just a couple of notes of caution about the use of unemployment statistics. First of all, the unemployment rate that we all see and read in the newspaper and use in our reports comes from the United States Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, which does a monthly review of all markets across the United States and focuses on specific markets. It's sort of like, if it plays in Peoria, will it play here? And they have specific markets that they look at, and they expand those statistics for a national view, and then disaggregate them for each market based on trends. So if Boeing comes to Charleston, they will reflect that as an obvious change to their national trends, but ordinarily they won't. Charleston's unemployment rate will go the way of the national rates and are influenced overly by those. It's a government project, that's it. The second consideration is that if you had a full-time job and made let's say $80,000, and the company leaves town or goes under, and you lose your job, and you go out and find 2 or 3 other jobs, and you're now making $60,000 or $50,000, you are underemployed. That's not reflected in the unemployment rates. If you're underemployed and you have a job for 20 hours a week, making far less than you used to, you have a job, you're employed, and that's not reflected in the unemployment rates. It's a very, very serious issue, particularly for areas that lose a primary employer or primary industry. And the third thing, and this is perhaps most critical for this area because of the statistics that you started with, if the economy has a very low unemployment rate, and there are parts of the community that have a much higher unemployment rate, I think you said 2% and 7%, something like that. If the African American community or the Hispanic or any part of the community lags behind the rest of the community in unemployment rates, then you have not developed the economy. You may have grown the economy, you have not developed it.
Great. We've kind of talked about labor market a lot. I'm wondering if you could think beyond that, what is the biggest unintended or unexpected challenge, or if you want to think of it another way, opportunity that has arisen from the business cycle as we go into the, I guess, 11th year of expansion?
But the first thing is that we're way past due for a big recession. And sooner or later, that's going to hit, and I don't know that.
That's a
your next
question.
question? Thank you very much. It's coming, and if the communities are prepared for it and companies are prepared for it, so much the better, but it's going to affect Charleston and the region and the state.
John, I don't know if you would call it an unexpected opportunity. I think if you look, so there are over 300 MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas in the country, and we rank 74th in terms of population. If you look at the last 5 years of this run, we were 5th in the country in job growth. 5th out of over 300 markets nationally. So only 4 groups. I went to South Carolina public school, so I know that we're 5th, so only 4 are ahead of us. We are dealing from a position of strength to deal with these issues that have arisen, whether it be, and Jamie, you named them well, the affordable housing issue, the transit issues. There are a lot of things. We've transitioned from a tertiary market nationally to a secondary market nationally. Institutional capital, if you drive up 26 and see all the million-square-foot buildings, you know that institutional capital has found our market and are funding big projects. So there are a lot of great things that have come about with this. I want to go back to what Gordon said. Look at this room. Look around you. Do you see faces that look different from you or look the same? Everybody in this room practically looks the same. We have not done a good job of capturing markets or underserved segments of our community. If you look at the data, whether it's K through 12 education, housing, whatever, people of color are not benefiting at the same level as the rest of us. That is our Achilles heel. Unless we find a way, you can talk all you want to about the minor nuisance that is a 35-minute drive every afternoon. People from other markets come in and say, you don't have traffic. Everything's relative. But the part that we have fundamental weaknesses in, when we can have the best schools in the state and the nation, places like Wando High School and Academic Magnet, and in the same general market have some of the worst performing schools in the state, we've got to do something about that. That is where the opportunity lies. But luckily, as I started with, we have a position of strength to operate from. Wow, that sucked the air out of the room.
I was just going to tag on something you said, Brent. We actually have a program, and I should have mentioned it earlier, called Heart for Hospitality. My colleague, Chris Campbell, right over there, played a pivotal role in that. And it is specifically designed to recruit minorities into the hospitality industry with the eye on a career path so that they are in mid to upper management and hopefully ownership positions. So we've gotten some good traction with that, and we see the sky as the limit for that. And it's a program that we envision going on, for years and years and years until we can get some kind of equity. And that, again, as you said, that the room looks like, this room will look like the community as a whole.
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of disparity in our state, and we've got about 30% of our population is African American, and only about 10% of the businesses are owned by African Americans, and the businesses that are owned by African Americans are only making about a third of what a white-owned business is. So, and a lot of times it's just about opportunity. We need to be thinking about within our own businesses how we diversify our suppliers, how we are looking at who we are hiring to do our landscaping, our accounting, our marketing, etc., and how can we make sure that we're bringing others along with us. Because if we are thinking about at some point the minority is going to be the new majority, that's going to greatly impact our economy. We started a program this year called Good Enterprises, and we are taking what we have found to be the best entrepreneurship program in the country, and we're actually taking it into the communities that have been underserved by these types of programs. And typical business has about a 50% success rate. After 5 years, the businesses that are coming out of this are projected to have an 87% success rate. And the majority of the people who are in our program are African American or Latino, and they are very excited about the opportunities ahead. We've already got one of them who's received a contract with the county as well as the city of Charleston. So these are the kinds of things that we need to be really putting our efforts into, because we know that if we're going to build wealth and prosperity for everybody, that the biggest way to build generational wealth is through ownership. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do, and I think that will impact our economy overall and make it a better place for everybody to live. And I would just say, back to what Perrin was talking about with the hospitality industry, I think that's great. We have so many of our members who are in the hospitality industry, and we just surveyed them. We survey them every year, and I'm happy to say that none of them said that they paid minimum wage. They'll pay more than minimum wage. But I think that that's something that the hospitality industry needs to take a really close look at, so that we're not continuing to have people who are working in those industries yet can't afford to live in this city.
Thank you, and that actually answered one of the later questions about how the Charleston region is doing in terms of the minority-owned businesses. So thank you for that. Looking forward, if we're going to keep seeing some more expansion and growth, we've talked about this a little bit. We've talked about diversification. You mentioned the life sciences industry. Where do we see those places for growth? Are there any industries that the Charleston region really hasn't gotten into yet? So where are those areas for growth that we see looking into the area's future?
I mean, I think you just said it. From our standpoint, everything that we do. Now, again, if we run across a project that doesn't fit neatly into one of those buckets, we'll talk to them, obviously. But I mean, our focus is those 4 areas, and really, we've kind of put the elephant gun away. We aren't looking for the big manufacturer at this point. It's more about filling in around what we have now. But the life science and IT industries or sectors are the real opportunity for us. I think if you look at what's happened, whether it's the tweet of the day on economic policy or tariffs here or tariffs there or what we're going to do, that's had an impact on how some of these big manufacturers in our market are approaching their business. Volvo, for example, they're making the S60, and it's been announced that they're going to add a second line to make the XC90. That timeline, though, has been pushed back because of the global uncertainty regarding tariffs. So some of the activity that we had anticipated, maybe in terms of the supply chain coming into our market, has backed up. So these decisions that you hear reported on the news and all the partisan banter that goes back and forth has an impact. It makes its way here in terms of how our companies make decisions about expansion, and then that trickles down to the groups that actually end up here. So in terms of really going outside of those 4 kind of main areas, the 5th thing I would add, though, obviously none of us have mentioned it, and it's probably the biggest reason for our expansion over the past 25 years, and that's the success of our port. Our port has done a great job in becoming more efficient and being very targeted in what they do, and obviously in expanding to the new Leatherman terminal, and obviously doing the harbor deepening, so they're the most competitive port on the East Coast. Anything that really kind of weaves in and out and involves logistics is also an area where we're going to have opportunity.
I would just add to that, I agree. I think that, looking at our anchor institutions, the port being one of them, hospitals, universities, what are the economic linkages that are occurring there? What are they currently sourcing elsewhere that they could be sourcing here. I think those are great things to look at in terms of creating a more sustainable economy where we aren't chasing the elephants. I think that what Charleston County Economic Development has been doing with supporting existing industries and that big focus that they've had on that is going to be critically important to making sure that the businesses that we have here are able to succeed. I think a great example of that recently is a company called Urban Electric. If you guys aren't familiar with them, they are a local manufacturing company. They do high-end lighting, they design it, they manufacture it here at the Navy Yard, and they are expanding and growing all the time. And they are a great example of a business who not only is very successful, but they're also doing great things for our community. They have something called UE University, where they're actually training people to become master craftsmen. They give back to the community. They're supporting Metanoia with their new school project that they're doing with early childhood development. So these are the kind of businesses that we really want to have in our community. We want to see them grow, and they're not going to go anywhere. So that's the great thing. And so I would say, looking at what we already have here, what can grow, and then putting some more focus on the on our anchor institutions. And I think what you were talking about earlier with the medical, really trying to provide, bring in more of those sort of technologies is going to be important. But also there's like simple things, right? So who's doing all of their laundry for all of the colleges and the hospitals? And could that be done here? And could that create jobs for individuals? So I think that there are some very simple things that could be done that probably are not going to be quite so expensive to us in the long run, and would be jobs that would stay here.
In the last 5 years before I left Virginia, we focused on not an industry, but more of an industry segment, which was translational medicine. For those of you who are not familiar with translational medicine, it is a dramatic growth industry for the future. It's simply taking every individual's genetic code, disaggregating your genetic code. Everybody has a single fingerprint. Everybody has a distinctly different code. It contains 6 billion characters with a B. Those characters are in a specific order unless in various phrases in your genetic code you have something that is out of order, then that's an indication that you may have a genetic predisposition for a given disease. Once that's identified, then you can be treated as an individual based on your individual DNA and how you will react. You can also take that anomaly in your people's genetic code, because you start stacking people with the same errors, if you will, in their genetic code, then you can read how to address diseases, and you can even resolve some of those issues. And I know that at the Stowers Institute in Kansas City, there's a couple, a husband and wife team, that are studying breast cancer and believe that they will ultimately be able to identify the error in people's genetic codes from which the genetic predisposition for breast cancer emanates, and resolve it, thereby resolving the whole issue. And ultimately their objective is to be able to identify for a child in utero before they're born, to amend their genetic code before they're born, and therefore eliminate their disposition of breast cancer. That's the kind of thing, just world-class discoveries that can be made and then translating it to individuals' treatment. I don't know if, honestly, I didn't do my homework, so I don't know if the hospital system here, MUSC or Roper or anybody else is doing that kind of research, but they have the capacity to do it. And once those discoveries are made, then you can commercialize them and populate the office buildings around the researchers and commercialize the companies and grow the economy through that.
And thank you for mentioning that, because that does bring to mind one, or really 2 areas where opportunities have emerged that we didn't foresee, and that's in the area of capital venture capital specifically, we went on a mission to Boston to try and identify some of the players in venture capital, and they said, well, actually the person you need to talk to lives in Charleston already. And we were like, you don't know what you don't know. And as we've looked at it with Capital Connections, what we're doing is there are 15 or 16 of these types of funds, and then the work that John Osborne and Patrick Bryant and others have done, with the Harbor Entrepreneurial Center. That ecosystem is really gaining momentum, kind of on its own without any real push from the government, which entrepreneurs, you would figure they probably would figure out a way to do it on their own. But the number of those funds and the available capital to fund those types of startups where you have the intellectual property at the MEDU, for example, and then we connect it with the capital, and then sky's the limit, and you can have exits with really big zeros attached to the end. So that's an area where I think you'll see a lot of activity in the coming years here.
Jerry, you flicked at the R word earlier, so I'm going to broach that question now. But the history tells us that a recession is inevitable, and there are already abundant signs that there's a slowdown in the global economy, and we, of course, are a global city by virtue of the port. Manufacturers like Boeing and Volvo and BMW. I think I read somewhere that Germany, which is our second largest trading partner, is near a recession. China is, we all know the trade situation. I'm not going to ask what the potential cause of the recession may be, but I do want to thoughts on what it'll look like in a city like Charleston.
I think the real question is where's it going to look like across the board, because I don't think Charleston's going to be any different than anywhere else in this sense. What it will look like is, the expression, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Well, the longer the growth goes, the harder the recession will be. And so I think it will be an extended recession. I think you'll see upticks in the unemployment rate that we discussed. I think it's going to be a difficult time, but again, going back to the discussion about diversification, small business growth is very, very important, because what typically happens when a large company closes or lays people off is that people go and turn to create small businesses of their own. If they have the support that groups like yours offer, then you can offset some of those losses. But it's going to be sustained, and I think the community has to be prepared for that. Not only businesses and employees, but the community, because you lose jobs or companies, you lose assessed value in buildings, the commercial office space, and therefore the tax base declines, and you can't provide services at the same level that you used to. So preparing for this is going to be important, but it will be sustained.
Yeah, agree. I would just add, we came out of the Great Recession faster than many of the regions around the country, and I'm not saying we can repeat that. I am just saying that the pieces are in place. Even if we do have a recession, sustained recession, we're diverse enough where I think we can recover quickly. But that is something, if you look at our activity in terms of inbound project hosting, we noticed about a year and a half ago that our activity had slowed due to global uncertainty, whether that's be it Brexit or tariffs or whatever. And we're usually about an 18-month leading indicator of what's going to happen. And we were off by about 40% in terms of our inbound activity. Thankfully, I can report that that's picked back up as companies around the world have sort of figured out the rules of the game. And if they're dealing in China, and there are tariffs on whatever, they're running through Vietnam, or they go through India. Markets find a way. Markets will find a way. And I think we just need to allow those markets to work, and we'll be fine.
So from each of you, you were just saying it's important to prepare for a slowdown. What is your advice for businesses? Also, like you were saying, just the community as a whole, in terms of what does it look like to be prepared?
I think for businesses it means, and for communities too, it means ease off on spending, probably create reserves, prepare for cutbacks, or it doesn't have to be layoffs, it could be just freezing positions, but whatever it is, to have that sort of an approach in mind. For communities, everything is going to be technology. And I don't mean just technology companies, but companies that use technology, which is essentially everyone at some point. So preparing the labor force and to have those technology skills that will be attractive to companies and will enable small businesses to start and to be more successful more quickly is critically important. And part of that is for the community. Part of that is not only encouraging students to study STEM subjects, but specifically young girls. In the K through 12, reports are still showing, but they've shown for the last 30 years, that somewhere around 5th or 6th grade, when the girls start dropping out of math and science and those things. When I was in that age range, prehistoric days, the girls were the best students in math and science, and then they disappeared. And you lose that component of the population you really need, because the most, by far, the most frequently conferred undergraduate degree across the entire country is, anybody want to guess? Psychology. Psychology. That's useless. It's not useless, but if you're looking for a job, science and math is much more useful.
I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. I would say that I think we're already seeing it. I think that people are already feeling pretty conservative in terms of their business growth, and I think just the fact that that unemployment is so low has caused some of that. I know a lot of businesses who've had the opportunity to grow or open up a second location, and they just are choosing not to. So I think people are already, while I think their revenues are increasing, I think they're already being pretty conservative about the decisions that they're making. And hopefully that means that they are building up those reserves that you mentioned that are going to be so critical to get them through that time. And once again, just, echoing that diversifying our economy as much as possible is going to be critically important to making sure that we can survive a recession.
And I would add one thing here, and this is not necessarily a local comment as much as it is a comment toward, we get the comment all the time, hey, you guys should slow down and stop recruiting so much. You're causing traffic. And I'm like, well, no. 30 years of neglect by our state on the infrastructure system had a little bit to do with that. And that's my point, in that I think you have Sam's Garden here in the back. What's the surplus revenue at the state this year? It's over $1 billion, right?
Yeah, it's $2 billion.
The state of South Carolina has a surplus in revenue of $2 billion with a B. How much of that is going to be frittered away on work projects and things like that versus being invested in the state of South Carolina, whether that's broadband infrastructure, improving our roads, improving water, sewer, helping local governments, coming in and spending that money in a wise way that positions us well for the future. $2 billion, that could do a lot of good in South Carolina, and so I think you should all be watching that closely and talking to your legislators as they go to Columbia in January.
I'll say this from the hospitality perspective. Everybody in our industry is still, I think, hopeful, mainly because we got so many projects in the pipeline. And they will say, only half-kiddingly, gee, we could use a mild recession just so we could get the unemployment rate up a little bit, so we have a few more employees to choose from, because they're building these projects, and it really becomes an issue of how in the world are we going to staff this, because although there are certain things that certainly can be automated in the hospitality industry, it's still a very labor-intensive business, and you've got to have people, and it's not just any people, you've got to have people with a service mentality, people who get a sense of satisfaction out of helping other people. So it's not just people, it's good people who are adept at that sort of thing. If you look at statistics and how we're doing as a region, one of the statistics people seem to focus on more than anything else is the hotel occupancy rate, which is a great benchmark, but only if inventory never changes. But the inventory, continues to increase. So right now, year to date, we're down about 2.3% in occupancy, but in room nights sold, which is a true apples to apples metric, we're up about 5.6%, which means that overall, these hotel rooms, there are more people coming and they're spending more. The rate has sort of gone down just a little bit, which is not unexpected since we've added 880 rooms so far this year. And there are probably another 25 to 2,900 in the pipeline, and that's regionally. Our hope, quite frankly, is that a good many of these projects end up not getting built, that somebody will slam the brakes on, because a lot of what you see that's been built, is being built now or is opened in the last couple of years, was on the books or in planning back in 2007, and they just shelved it until things got good again. So, we're certainly subject to the cyclical nature of things, but the difference between Charleston now and Charleston, say, 15 years ago is, as everyone here has pointed out, the strength of the port, the strength of the medical university, the manufacturing we have here, the 600 plus IT companies, and the fact that we've become, quite frankly, an international leisure destination. We've got more meetings and conventions coming here. So from the standpoint of consuming hotel rooms, meals, shopping, all that sort of thing, the hospitality industry very much benefited from that.
Thank you. I was wondering if we can now open it to the floor for questions.
Okay, I love the discussion you're having right now, and everyone's talking about diversity and so forth. I'm Lee Moultrie, I'm a native of Charleston, and I retired from the Air Force 25 years ago. I worked in the hospitality community in 1972, so I'm in discussion with Mark Gibson about the rest. When I'm looking at the businesses downtown Charleston, all over, and as you said a few minutes ago, look at this room. You have me, Mr. Robinson, and this gentleman here. So when you're looking at businesses, I always ask whites, do you have any African American friends? Are you bringing them to the table also? If you're not, why not? If this is your friend, why are you not making sure him or her are getting some of the pie that you're getting also? Access to resources, money, other things that they may not know about. And this is how we can diversify and grow this market. What Jamie's doing over there, local low countries first, it's a great project. All of you on the panel, that's the only reason I'm here, because I read it in the paper on Monday. So thank God you're doing what you're doing. But please, when you leave here today, call your African American friends, call your Hispanic friends, call your female friends, call your white friends who may not have access to this information, and make sure that they're doing being a part of all that's going on. When you speak about the hospitality community, we're talking about wages. There's one thing to work in that industry, but you also have to make sure that the people are making a livable wage, as you're talking about, but also the transportation. But we have to make sure, and they have to be assured that they're not going to be terminated at a moment's notice, but they don't have anyone advocating for them. But those are a couple of things. That young lady there, that's my hero right there. Use her expertise that she brings to the table. I bring group buying power to help small businesses also. All of us can help you. But please, engage your friends, your neighbors, and if you don't have African American friends, you don't have one, talk to me before you leave. I can be your friend.
Anyone else?
So I'm gonna walk over here and be your friend.
You can be her friend.
If you'll be my friend. Good morning, everybody. I'm Phyllis Martin. This is my third day in Charleston. I just accepted the president position of the Tri-County Creative Career Collaborative. Particular Roger has been my champion cheerleader and really the power behind me actually standing good job for people to do in this area.
I think part of the answer is the parents, because we have the same problem in Northern Virginia. A person coming out of college with a degree in psychology, if they could get a job, is starting around $35,000. A tradesperson, could start close to $100,000. And 5 years later, they were making much more or started their own companies. But the parents insist that their children go to school. They drive them to school. They ignore the opportunities. Trades, military is a good way to start a career for people. They ignore that. So I think the answer starts with the parents.
But you're saying they're coming out of TriNet and they're not prepared?
So no, we're just not seeing, being a millennial, I was just never thought to go to a technical school, or none of my friends did either. It's all, you go to a 4-year degree, and, we're not seeing parents, like you said, take their kids to even know that that's an option or a well-paying job, to be with
I think you're starting to see a mindset shift. With that, I think one of the things driving that is student debt. People aren't willing to go to a 4-year institution and come out with $150,000 in debt to go make that psychology degree that you got, and you can go make 40 grand a year. You get B, cost of living. I'm living in Orangeburg and driving in every day. I mean, that's sort of where we are. But what's happening is as people are, as the leadership of the school districts and the guidance counselors and the parents, for that matter, are being exposed to the fact that manufacturing 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever 0.0 we're on now, you go to Boeing and you can eat off the floor. It's a clean, high-paying job. The trades are phenomenal options for people, and you can make go be an HVAC person. My God, you make 6 figures, especially in this market in June. Because they're in demand. So it's a mindset shift. It's parents, to your point, and it's really also the school districts and guidance counselors really getting engaged and promoting those opportunities. It's a good question.
I'm the president of the Rotary Club of Charleston, and we just participated in the United Way Day of Caring, and 3 of the high schools actually had career conferences for students that weren't that didn't score high enough to even look at colleges, and that was the brunt of it was about these technical opportunities that are available. They had people there from 911, South Carolina Department of Transportation, a lot of different industries who are hiring right off the top, in addition to traffic counts. So there's some good things, some movement afoot. We saw it just as fast, and they're going to do more of those career conferences.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the work the Charleston Metro Chamber is doing with their apprenticeship programs. I mean, it's a national model. It's been recognized as such by the federal government. So we've got folks in this market who are highly capable and really doing great work in that market.
All right, well, I think we've had a great discussion, and welcome to Charleston and your 3rd day. That's really awesome. Like I mentioned before, the Inside Business Live is a quarterly series. We welcome your feedback at what topics you'd like to learn about. Things that have been on the table for discussion for next topics include cybersecurity for businesses, how energy is impacting our businesses today, and what are some solutions that we can do to be more efficient. So if you do have suggestions, please contact us, let us know. We love to hear about them. And then our news team and our team, we review them, and we put together a great program for the rest of the year. But please sign up for our business newsletter that's run by Emily Williams. It's twice a week. Which days, Emily? It's
Monday and Thursday.
Mondays and Thursdays.
Tomorrow's will feature some highlights from today. So if you want some kind of notes of what you learned today,
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, and y'all enjoy the rest of your beautiful sunny week.
Round of applause for our
Thank you.